everyone, and welcome to Cosmic Conversations. I'm your host, Sheila Seppi, and you're watching us right here on the Conscious Awakening Network. I want to thank all of you who are here in the audience, the ones that are watching on YouTube, Amazon Roku, Apple TV, Android TV. Maybe you're watching us on our phone apps or even on the website. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We also have about 40 other platforms that people are watching us on. So I want to remind you to please go. If you don't have our app, please go to our app store. You can go to the phone app store and download it. It's free. You can also go to Roku, Amazon, Apple TV. You have to log in on your computer though. And then just type in, once you're in there, go to their store, type in our app, and you can download that as well. But remember, you can't watch it if you don't download it. So we hope that you will be joining us there. Now, I want to remind you also that we're launching a new membership and an affiliate program on October the 24th. So be sure to check us out right on consciousawakeningnetwork.org. Now, tonight, we're going to speak about how source science supports transpersonal experiences such as walk-ins. So you know I'm excited about it. And this is a topic we're going to be discussing tonight with Quantum Doug. Now, Quantum Doug's research has been an informative perspective on proto-physics and below the quantum and the Planck scale. So I'm interested to hear about that. So his source science approach was started about 25 years ago and resulted in his Ph.D. on quantum computing using geometric algebra in 2002. Now, that demonstrates that bits themselves are orthonormal dimensions or hyperbits. And once you understand the arrival of this quantum computing, you end up in the hyperdimensional, the entangled bits, and the four-dimensional, what he calls the spooky action. And then the conclusion is all quantum. So we're looking forward to hearing all about that tonight. We can't wait to get started. So Quantum Doug, hello, hello, and welcome.
Hey, thanks, Sheila. Thanks for the introduction. Great.
It is so
All
good to
that
have
technical
you.
terminology, you're not used to that probably.
I'm not. I was like, but, a little bit tongue-tied, but I know what you're talking about. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to hear more. I'm excited for you. Actually, I'd like for you to maybe start and tell people a little bit about how you got started, and also then just tell us about your research, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a scientist. I'm an engineer, and an electrical engineer and computer programmer. And so I've always been interested in information and programs and simulation and stuff like that. But I realized early on that if metaphysics was true, then there's a whole level of information science that's completely different than what we know from regular conventional physics and science and classical physics. And so 25 years ago, I started studying quantum computing, and in fact got a PhD. Most people get their PhD when they're in college, right? Well, I didn't go get my PhD until I was 49, so just in time before I was 50. But I worked in quantum computing, and I hated the math that they use for regular quantum computing. So I found this math called geometric algebra that that basically showed that you can use bits, and I showed bits can build quantum computing. So it's kind of using information perspective from the beginning, and think of that as you could actually bootstrap the entire universe using just pure bits. And so I tongue-in-cheek say, if God was trying to build the universe with something, he would use bits to do it, because bits are just mathematical. They're not physical until you start getting enough of them together to form the physical universe. So physical universe is built on top of those quantum bits, those proto bits, those bits that I use in the math. So, and by the way, neural computing is all related to this too. But go ahead. What was your question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and isn't it interesting how in the spiritual world, we're always talking about downloads, or we're uploading, or, we always use the computer terminology to describe what's happening to us, everything. I think it's interesting.
And so a lot of people use the term subtle energy, and they use the higher frequency and all these terminologies. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is I think as soon as you start realizing there's this divide in my book, I have a book, Deep Reality, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And a lot of these ideas came from that. And it basically, it says, look, we're using the poor language to describe what's happening for these transpersonal experiences, right? And all the information ideas that now we're used to because we have virtual reality and virtual simulators and these virtual games that we're playing, right? What does it take to do that? It just takes information technology. It doesn't really take energy per se. You know, a computer isn't a battery, it's information technology, right? So our mind is more like an information source than it is subtle energy. So I'm trying to understand the balance between people's experience of consciousness and experiences and knowing as energy versus information. So, you know, maybe you might have some insights you could help me with on that.
I've got a lot of questions, so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make my list as we go along.
Okay, so you keep
After
track
the
of them so you don't
presentation,
forget.
I'll ask.
So if you want, I have some slides that, you know, part of this, you start talking about one of the things you realize that as soon as you know anything a little bit about quantum computing, and I'm going to give you a quick 3 or 4 slide introduction to quantum computing tonight so that we're all on the same page and you see where I'm coming from. And there's more of it in the book too. So, and if you don't like technology, just skip through that part of the book and go to the fun part where I say, well, what does this all mean, right? So, but you want to, it's sort of like, I tell it to people, it's like if you go to the mechanic and you're trying to talk about your car, if you don't know any of the vocabulary about what's the transmission, where's the tires, where, you know, where's the engine, you know, gas tank, air conditioning, you don't know any of the terminology, then you can't talk to anybody about it, right? So I'm trying to define all the terminology of consciousness and mind and knowing and transcend personal experiences from this information perspective. So we now have a common vocabulary. So get the book just for that reason alone, because I spend a lot of time with glossaries and defining terms in that perspective. So with that, I'm going to go bring up a slideshow here, and I'm going to share, and then we'll, and I encourage you, Sheila, to make sure that this is an interactive conversation, right? And so hopefully, so you can just ask away as we go. So here's my title slide. Here's this little Deep Reality is sort of the cover of my book, part of the cover of my book, so you can remember that. And here's a little quick summary of my credentials. Essentially, like I said, I have papers, a lot of papers, Ph.D, SBIR contract back in 20 years ago, where I studied the relationship between neural and quantum computing. A lot of that is part of this. Hosted 2 workshops on physics and computing, and some very famous people in the quantum computing area came to those conferences back in 1992 and 94. I got a paper in 1997 with physical scalability, sabotage, performance game through architecture.
Uh-oh. Doug, I think we lost you there.
Even years later. So to give you a sense of that, I also am certified master. I can see you moving. I can see you moving there.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It kind of froze up, but
yeah,
I guess
I froze up a little bit, but we'll continue going, and we'll just give me a thumbs up when you can see me moving again. So
I can.
So I wrote this. William Tiller, he's now deceased, and also co-founded this company called Coherent Spaces. So these are, you know, I'm a doer, not just a thinker. So here's the abstract. You know, I'm going to talk about through consciousness, telepathy, and walk-ins, and all that kind of stuff that you love to talk about, Sheila. So with that, we'll talk about how this is all related to hyperbit clouds. So the reason I use the term hyperbit clouds because it's a hyperdimensional bit structure that's informational oriented. I call it a cloud because it's really not a field. A field only exists in space-time. So there's the defining this terminology there. So that's why I use those terms. So, okay. So So, I mean, here's the
And
big
that
one is
cloud represents what?
the consciousness. Yeah. Yeah. So most of the
Yes.
time people think about the classical worldview, right? They think about um, regular physics and regular computer science, right? And they think that the brain is a computer. So they think, therefore, they can build artificial intelligence versions of the brain because they think it's just a computer. But the problem is they don't have any meaning. So generalized AI is not possible. And also consciousness, everybody doesn't know what it is yet. It's a curiosity, but not understood. And then, of course, people think that death is permanent because we're just a meat machine, and when it dies, then there's no survival. But this transcendent worldview is that the mind exists independent of the brain, space and time. It's information centric, so it's synonymous with metaphysics. And I call it real intelligence because it's using real hyperdimensional states rather than simulated hyperdimensional states. And so now meaning is part of the human mind. Otherwise, we wouldn't have things like telepathy and law of attraction. Okay. So it's required for those things to happen. So I'm giving you a quick summary of the kinds of things we're going to talk about, go into a little bit more of each of these. And it's all related to quantum computing. And why do I say that? Because quantum computing is fundamentally part of what the universe is. So if we can build all these ideas on top of quantum computing, we don't have to invent anything new. We just have to apply quantum computing to this problem. And so then everything is consciousness, everything has meaning, everything is love. So, that last statement seems like everybody has a hard time talking about consciousness and conscious, and yet people who have near-death experiences and transcendent experiences say that everything is conscious. So, what does that mean in all this model? Obviously, we could talk for an hour over, a drink, just talking about consciousness. So, and there's whole conferences on it, but I tend not to talk about consciousness very much. So anyhow, you see the divide here I'm creating. So, and people who have these transcendent experiences can have an abrupt shift in their worldview, like anybody who has an NDE, or they become aware that they're a walk-in. Sometimes the walk-in is due to an NDE, right? So, that's how that happens. So this is the approach I'm taking. These are sort of the beginning of my book. Bits are physical. This is called Landauer's principle, and Landauer was actually Ralph Landauer from IBM was actually at my conference in '92. And he says, bits affect the physical world. Bits show up in the fundamental discrete increments in black holes. Wheeler's it from bit. So bits are no longer computer science, they're physics now. So everybody should know that, okay? The other thing is I say bits are protophysical. Tongue-in-cheek, I call it Matzke's principle. It means that these mathematical structures exist independent of space and time. So they're before time. That's what proto means. Proto means before physical. And so they're more like abstract mathematical things. And that's why people can get downloads, because they can get downloads of information, like even in mathematics. So where does that come from? So we're going to talk about some of those ideas. And so that's what I did for my PhD. And that bits are hyperdimensional. Once you understand that you can build quantum computing using bits, then you realize that the universe is hyperdimensional. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, because a lot of people have a hard time understanding what 3-dimensional is, but 4-dimension, 5-dimension, 20-dimensional spaces, 100-dimensional spaces, that's hard to understand. And there's unusual properties in qubits, this superposition and entanglement idea, but there's also more unusual properties in a 20-dimensional space called standard distance and some of these ideas. Law of attraction is built on that math. So if you're interested in law of attraction, then this math is basically the math behind law of attraction. So these are some of the ideas that that's the basis for it. I talk about this heavily in the book, okay? And so real intelligence is due to these hyperbits, our consciousness, our mind, our thinking, our thoughts, our knowing is all part of these hyperbits. And artificial intelligence doesn't use that technology, so they will always be dumb compared to humans, okay? So I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm talking about what people who have near-death experiences care about. Here's a picture, an image of maybe the experience somebody would have when they were seeing the source, when they had an NDE. So I want to include this because What's the source? What are all these beings? How can we interact with them telepathically? This is all information science. Why is that white light so bright, but yet it doesn't hurt us? How it can be a virtual photon without having the energy of a photon, right? It's not like a sun that's producing heat. It's just producing virtual photons. So these are all conversations now that we can have when you start looking at this spiritual phenomena from this perspective. And what does it take to make light, a virtual photon? Just a three-dimensional structure. So there's where the trinity from spirit comes in. You have to have 3 dimensions to get light. And so it looks like a Q-trit. It's called a Q-trit, and it's a photon, virtual photon. And so that's what that is. And so that's what auras are too. So, okay. So do you have any comments or questions about this slide? Or?
Well, not specifically about that slide, but I do want to ask, do you see the soul versus consciousness as different, or do you see them the same, or are you not bringing a soul into play here?
Yeah. Well, I heard what I heard was a good definition the other day of soul. It's sort of like if you have a spiritual being, let's say you had a near-death experience and you saw that there was your dead grandpa, your grandfather who had already deceased, and you might have met him, okay, and then you're interacting with him, and it's your grandfather. So that soul, that being, exists in the spiritual domain, and it's coherent. In other words, it coalesces to maintain the impression that it's a being, right? And the question is, that same beingness is what we have when we have a lucid dream. So we have this beingness, which is our consciousness, that holds our consciousness together rather than just dispersing, right? And so the soul is the connection of that beingness to the physical reality. And so that soul helps bind that to the experiences in the physical reality too. So there's this kind of like boundary layer where the soul, where the quantum mind version of spirit and the physical brain, there's this soul layer, which is the connection between those two that helps even make it more coalesce. I mean, the brain is an antenna. It has to interact with this. And so what's the mechanism for where the mind can control the brain? That source science talks about that too. So did that answer your question about soul? Is this special cohesiveness that interacts with the brain and keeps track of your experiences in history in a way
yeah I was just curious about what your definition of that would be, or if you were even addressing that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So I mean, everybody has a slightly different being of soul and different levels of consciousness, and so and there's some more about that in the book, the chakras and the 7 layers of consciousness around the body, those auric layers around the body, and each one of them has different properties. So there's more about that in the book too. So the other thing that people talk about is when they have an NDE, they step out of time. They're the tunnel experience, the NDE tunnel experience. Well, to me, this is well defined from my perspective, is because you're stepping out of time. And so what is that light? That light is where you no longer have space and time, and you're connected to everything. That's what that light is. That's what the source is. And so this is a passageway where you're going from focus in space-time to where you're focused not in space-time. So you're stepping out of space-time. So that's this transition that happens. And it happens when you have a lucid dream, or if you have an out-of-body experience too. You can have this transition for all of a sudden you're aware of much more than you were if you're restricted to the limits of space and time. So and we'll talk about how big consciousness, this whole quantum mind idea, is in a couple other slides from now. So I want to talk about this because, in fact, I'm going to do no more talks about, well, if you have hyperdimensional space, you also have non-normal versions of time, and what does that mean? And there's a whole bunch. You could talk a whole hour just on different models of time, and I'm going to write a talk about that soon. So, and then there's the life review, right? So you're stepping out of time, and now you can see all of time at once. And I call this panoramic time. And it's because time, it's like you're a puppeteer above your timeline, Timeline is from neuro-linguistic programming again. It's this timeline. And then you're out of time, and you can see all of your timeline for this life, all your past lives, and even your ancestral lives, right? Not only your immediate past lives, but your ancestors' lives too. So, you can connect to all of this. That's why when you have a near-death experience, you have a life review, because all of a sudden you're connected instantly to all of this, and you think of it as a life review. So, and it's normally we would think if we had access to that much information all the time, that it would be overwhelming. But for the right, and people who have near-death experiences, they say they're overwhelmed by thoughts and telepathy and awareness and emotions of all the people around them. So we just have to get used to the idea that we can connect to a lot bigger perspective than just the minimum that we see when we're connected to our physical body. So I want to talk about these kinds of ideas too. The life review is part of this temporal model. So if you experience a sort of a panoramic time or out of time behaviors, Sheila?
When I incarnated, it was as if lightning ran through my body, and then I was in white space. I didn't go through a review, because what actually happened was the soul that walked out possibly went through a review, but I wasn't attached to that experience. Now, my memories tell me, and when I work with clients, we will go to different halls of learning. We'll go to the Chronicle Caverns. We'll go to a lot of different places, which I believe is depicted by the ring that is kind of brown, has a little green to it, where we're showing all of these images. But yes, to my remembrance, to my knowing, once people are out of the body, many people will go through a life review, and it's almost just instantaneous. You see everything.
All at once. You see everything all at once. It's
all
like,
at once.
you're looking at time like you would be like a panoramic view of Grand Canyon from an airplane. You seeing it all at once, and you can focus in on any part of it. It's not like it's not like it's like a buffet. You can eat all you want, but you don't have to eat it all at once.
Right.
You can choose. So
so at that point, then the consciousness is free of the body or the soul,
and space and time as much as anything else.
Right. And then where do the pixelizations or the bits, because I see everything in pixels, and that very well may be the bits that you're referring to.
The granularity of the information.
But
and the point is I want to tell you is that even though you have bits, there's something more primitive than bits, and that is the states formed by the combination of those bits. And that was the thing I learned from my PhD, and I'm relearning that every day. The other day I did an experiment. I'm saying, what happens if I square this thing? Can I get this result? And the answer was yes, and I was surprised by that, because it says the states formed by the bits are more primitive than the bits themselves, because they have much more complexity due to their combinations. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute here too about that. So realize, and that's because these states are wave-like. And so you have this go between the pixelization of bits and the non-pixelization of the wave-like nature of the quantum state. And so I think most people tap into the wave-like nature of the quantum states, but it sounds like you have an interaction and an awareness of the pixelization, that ultimately bits are everything at the bottom level here. So that's interesting. I'd like to talk with you more about that. But here is sort of like, try to put this in perspective of people. Most people think, oh, here's the classical realm, here's the quantum realm. And then there's this thing that most people don't know about called the Planck scale. And notice the Planck scale is, another 20 orders of magnitude below even the quantum and quark area. How big is a quantum? How big is an electron? How big is a proton? And so down here at the very bottom, there's this blue line. This is the line where space and time ends. This is the place where quantum foam exists, where Planck scale, where the smallest distance and the smallest and bits interact. And then I'm saying there's stuff below this line, and that's what I call bit physics or protophysics, more primitive. And this is the realm of pure bits, quantum bits, and e-bits. And this is what we're going to talk about today. But this domain it's a hyperspace, but it doesn't have conventional spaces above this, space-time metrics. And below this, there's no space, no time, no metrics. And so everything is connected to everything else. It's like an infinity. And everything is connected to everything else because it's more wave-like than particle-like.
Mhm.
So because it's not in space-time, it's all connected. So this is the experience people have who've had, spiritually transformative experiences and near-death experiences. They say I just am connected with everything, and I don't know where something else ends and where I begin, right? So you don't lose your identity, but you're connected to everything at that level. So I call it wholeness without holograms. Because most people think of it as holograms.
Yeah. So in this pre-matter state, would this be what a lot of people refer to as the void?
Yeah, it's down there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can have two kinds of voids. They're kind of like mirror images of each other. And in fact, I went to a lucid dreaming class at the Monroe Institute last fall, and there was one guy experiencing, he says, he went into this state where he was viewing the source, and then he crossed this line where he was in the void, and then back across the line into the source where he was connected to everything or nothing. It's like two sides of the coin. And what does that mean from a consciousness perspective? Notice his consciousness didn't dissolve in either one of them. It had cohesiveness, but he could experience the void and he could experience the source. And so anybody who has an experience of that, I'd like to talk with them more about that. So there's an example where some guy was actually talking about it in the lucid dreaming class. So,
well, I do want to make a comment here because, I work with a collective. When I came in, I'm just an aspect, so I'm still attached, and they send information all the time. And recently, they've begun to speak to me about how the universe is almost like in the shape of an infinity. So there is, so there's this reflective aspect of everything that's going on. And of course, within this infinity are tons and tons of universes. We're just one little tiny universe. But it's very, very interesting because when you were talking about this reflective state of the source, also they were talking with me about with the source, like the etheric, of course, the source is etheric, but this other layer being where all of the templates of creation are located. And I'm seeing how that fits here. Then we talk about those individual templates, how once they begin to open up, they begin to form what we refer to as various monads. And I could see that is where the quantum realm then begins to take place. So I'm loving your chart. I'm a chart person. So this is super cool.
Everybody loves this particular one because all of a sudden it's in perspective for them. So
love it.
And just realize that archetypes are essentially this quantum realm, these structures of knowing. And Robert Monroe called them rotes because they stand for packets of meaning. Think of it as internet packets of meaning, thought packets of meaning, like internet packets are. And so how do you have a structure like that? And that's part of the telepathy story, part of the quantum consciousness, part of the walking. I mean, how do you get information if you don't have matter, energy, space, or time? So and I'm going to show you what this structure looks like, what rotes look like here in a couple slides, and show you where the structure comes from. Turns out if you have bits, you can combine them to form qubits, and you can combine those to form e-bits, and then you can combine them larger to form these rotes with meaning. And it's all outside space and time. So it's just these little molecular meaning molecules, if you want to, molecules of meaning. And that's the kind of language that Robert Monroe would talk about with remote viewing and that kinds of ideas. So anyhow, again, all these slides, we could have more conversation, but let's give you a little impression about an introduction to simple introduction to quantum computing, because this is how I think about quantum computing, is that you have all these bits. And these bits are like, think of it like a coin, where the up arrow points to from the head of the coin, and the down arrow is the tail of the coin. So generally, the coin can be either heads or tails. And the same thing is true with here. You have a vector, which represents a coin either heads up or heads down. So it's going to either be plus or minus, okay? But each one of these coins is not, coin is usually in space-time. It has a locality. So if you have a bunch of coins sitting on a table, they're all in space-time, but they're all concurrent. But these are different. These are mathematical objects. So this is a vector, a single dimensional vector that represents a unique distinction. And this is another one, but if you take two of those, they're 90, any two of these, they're 90 degrees apart. So this right here I'm showing you is a 20-dimensional space. And you go, how can you even talk about a 20-dimensional space, Doug? Well, that's because most people who do that use math to talk about it. And so I've spent 20 years talking about this math, 25 years talking about this math. And so I'm very instinctive about this. And these bits are orthogonal. They're all 90 degrees from each other. Pick any two of these and they're 90 degrees. So imagine a single point, and every one of these vectors comes out from that single point, and yet they're all 90 degrees from each other. And we know that in 3 dimensions, you can only have 3 of those to do that. As soon as you add a 4th one, you can't do that. So this is the basis of the math. It's called geometric algebra, and I'm using a kind of algebra, mathematical algebra, that has a geometric property, these dimensions. And so now bits are conducive and work together with physics. That's what this kind of math does. And this geometric algebra has been around for quite a while, but 20 years ago when I was working on this, another guy at Cambridge was working on the same thing, geometric algebra. And so there's a lot of material out there now about using geometric algebra to describe physics. Okay, so, but you can also have a 3-dimensional thing. And by the way, these 2-dimensional things are just qubits. And it looks like A plus B, okay? And if you have 3 of these dimensions, now you have a little volume. This is actually a plane. This is a volume. It's 3 of these. And the A plus B plus C here, this is actually a photon, a virtual photon. This is, if you square this, you get 0. And what that means is this times itself is 0, and that is nilpotent, and that's a definition of a photon. So, so here you have structure forming up from bits to 2-dimensional planes to 3-dimensional objects. So you have structure using pure bits, okay? And even you get these mathematical relationships called quaternions for those who are interested in the math. Instead of using vectors x, y, and z, you get these planes that also have an orientation, and they form a volume also. So this is the famous mathematical properties of quaternions. So it's just people who are interested in math and know that this comes out of there as well. So do you have any comment about this before we go on? Just to get a sense of, this is the fundamental, this is what God would create the universe with, right? Is these bits, because they're just abstract mathematical things that don't have any physical existence except for their dimensionality.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. So this relates to the dimensions.
Yeah. Each one of these is its own dimension.
Yes, what I thought.
Yeah. And so you can't, in fact, you can't put this inside 3D. And I'm going to show you a picture here in a minute where you have a bunch of these, you can simulate 3D inside of it. I'll show you what that looks like. So that's this idea. I have a whole talk out there about that the universe is a simulation. And so I talk about that aspect of it more out there. So here, let's take a little bit take that previous thing and just go into it a little bit more detail. There's only a couple slides like this, and then I'll get back to the fun stuff. But this stuff here, you should understand that this is how I think about it. And this is fundamental to the way that physics is organized and qubits and all this other stuff is organized, okay? So here you have a single bit. We talked about that. It has, think of it a vector A and B and C. We're just putting labels on them. We're putting a name on them. It's a mathematical structure that has a name on it. This is vector A. It can have a coefficient in the front of it. It's A times some coefficient, and that coefficient either can be +1, -1, or 0. So sometimes that dimension disappears out of the formula, right? And so this is like tri-state logic. So that's the difference. By going to a vector representation, now you have this extra value, the coefficient of 0, and you don't have that in Boolean algebra. So that's why this is so much more powerful than Boolean algebra, okay? And so these are bit vectors, they're proto-dimensions, they're distinctions. This is fundamental information science in a mathematical formalism, okay? So that's important, okay? And this is probably the granularity you're seeing. You know, we can't see these, just like you can't see quarks in physics. You can't see bits because they're too small for us to see. So, but we know they have to be there, just like we know quarks have to be there. We know this have to be there because of the properties. So, but maybe the mind can actually tap into these bits. And if you can, then you can program the proto-computer that runs the universe. And that's how we do PK, psychokinesis, and manifest, because we're programming these bits directly in the universe. That's in the simulation that runs the universe. Okay. So what if we take two of these now? So we have one vector going up and down, and another vector going east, left and right. Okay. And I'm only showing one side of the vector here now instead of both sides. And so normally we think of this as the heads of the coin and the tail of the coin. But now when you have a qubit, we're going to say state 0 is the head and state 1 is the head and state 0 is the tail. But they're each their own vector like this, but they're 90 degrees. This is a qubit. And the advantage of this representation is now that you can have something that's 50-50. It can be a 45-degree angle state where it's half of this and half of this. And this is where qubits get their power. It's called superposition. Okay. And so it's because the mathematics of orthogonal dimensions. Physics is full of this. Okay. That's why physics works. And so this is another way of doing it mathematically. So, but this looks the exact same way as quantum computing using the old style math. This is called Hilbert spaces. And I use this iconic representation like this. This double line means it's this. If you have two dimensions like this, by definition, you have this plane created by that, and that's called a bivector. And this is structure. Conventional Hilbert spaces that's used in regular quantum computing doesn't have any structure to it. It's just a pile of dimensions. And you go, well, how can you get anything with a pile of dimensions? And that's the beauty of this geometric algebra approach, is that you can get structure out of it now. You can get planes, you can get volumes, and you can get molecular meaning out of this. Okay. But the other thing you can get, it turns out, if you have two dimensions, you have enough states in there, you have 81 states, that you can actually get things called bosons and neutrinos. I think, and we can talk about it a little bit more in a couple slides here, but essentially neutrinos are some of the most mysterious objects in the world, and they're everywhere. A bazillion of them are going through your body every time and go straight through the earth without even touching it. They're so weird because and I believe it's because they're two-dimensional. So this is, if you're aware of neutrinos, if you can become aware of neutrinos, ask the question, what's your dimensionality? If you can talk to neutrinos, ask what their dimensionality is, So kind of like what they did with the Anu from Leadbetter and the stuff from the early 1900s, where they were looking at remote viewing down at the atomic level. So then when you get to 3 dimensions, instead of having only 81 states, this has only 3 states. This has 81 states. This has 81 squared states, 6,100, 6,400 states of all the possible combinations of those. Now you get volumes, you get the quaternions, but you can also get photons, quarks, mesons, electrons, and neutrinos. You can get all these particles in here. So you have to have enough complexity, a 3-dimensional complexity, to get particles of this nature. Okay, and we're just going to take a couple slides in here so you get to see where all this structure comes from. And then finally you get 4 dimensions, and you take two qubits, you get 2 qubit things, and you combine them, and it forms this, what's called the Bell states and the magic. These are entangled states. And basically, if you take qubit A times qubit B and multiply them together, you get this state. Looks just like the Hilbert space state. And then you get this Bell state and the magic state. This is the spooky action at a distance state that they talk about, okay? And this math predicts the same entangled states that you get in regular quantum computing. So, and it turns out that in order to have entangled states, you have to have a four-dimensional object. And the only difference between this and regular Hilbert space is these here are not vectors with a label. This is actually a bivector, and has a fundamentally different meaning than what's done in regular Hilbert spaces. So just realize there's a deep topic here of the math and the meaning of the math. And I just wanted to touch base with this so that when you read the book, you go, oh, I see what Doug's talking about now here. So multidimensional spaces can be formed from this infinite set of orthonormal bit vectors. And so that's what we're learning here. So I'm going to have one more slide here. Remember I said, if you take a state, one of these states, and you say U times U is equal to 1, those are all the particles. And here's all the particles we know in neutrino state, which is two-dimensional, electron, proton, neutron in 3 dimensions. Notice that this structure here is not just a pile of dimensions, it's a pile of structure. Okay, this is the structure that's going to be important as we start building telepathic rotes, okay, because this structure is like a little packet of meaning. And so likewise, you can do the same thing over here. If you have this property called nilpotence, n times n equals 0, then all of these are bosons. They're like virtual particles. They're the force carriers. Gluons, the Higgs, it turns out the Higgs boson is also 4-dimensional, and it looks like a boson. So we think this is what the boson looks like. So and there's also a quark which is related to dark matter and dark energy. Notice that there's a regular quark, has this structure, but there's this dark quark that has a 4-dimensional version of a 3-dimensional regular quark. And so this is why dark matter and dark energy is so strange. First of all, it's 4-dimensional, and it's built on this odd algebra. So it's not even algebra like conventional physics is. So here's some insights about why things are hard to measure in regular physics, is because their structure is so different. And this math all holds together, and you can show all this stuff. You can do quark math. You can do essentially a proton is essentially a photon and electron, which is true. And a neutron essentially is a rotation of a proton, which is also true. So this has got a positive charge, and this has a neutral charge. So anyhow, those are the kinds of things that we can see out of this structure. So what does all this mean? If you have all this structure, this is we're going to get back to the fun part now. So did you have any questions about, structure exists? It's purely bit based. This might be the granularity you're seeing. If somebody can tap into this level like they did with the Anu, great. They can give me some feedback about this. So any questions or comments about what this is doing? I mean, does this speak to you? Does it look like light language to you?
It does. Some of the symbols resemble this, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think light language may be related to this, so
Could
I mean,
be.
this is, yeah. So, okay, so we're going to just kind of blow through these slides so we can get to the fun conversation parts here. So this is, if you have all this structure and you were trying to say, well, what could you build with it? You could just keep clumping these together and form, I would call, hyperbit cloud minds. And so if this is one consciousness, this is another consciousness, I'm showing them as though they exist and separated in space, but in 3-dimensional space, this image. But remember, this isn't a hyperdimensional space. So these are all hyperdimensional objects. And I'm just showing them as adjacent in the hyperdimensional space. But we're going to show another slide here in a minute, which shows that they don't really have locality like particles do, but they do have structure. And I'm trying to represent the structure here. So this could be 2 hyperbit mind clouds, cloud minds that are this forming the structure. Okay, here's another one that could, these are trying to get ChatGPT image generation to generate what it looks like hyperdimensional bit minds. Okay, but this includes connections to all your memories, all your awareness, all your past lives. You make all your decisions in this space, all your consciousnesses in this space. And we're going to talk about how your consciousness improves complexity as you learn more. And we'll show a slide in that in a minute as well. So anyhow, these kind of are fun pictures, I think. And ChatGPT did a pretty good job generating these. So here's another one. It says, like, this is what meaning rotes would look like. These are the rotes. Robert Monroe called them rotes, which are packets of meaning. And think of this as a little thought cluster. This could also be, like we were talking about, Jung psychology. You know, these are these little packets of awareness, and that they all exist independently, but they can interact in a way. So if you do a remote viewing experiment and you say, give me the information for this, you're essentially connecting to one of these at the remote location. And people talk about that they receive a rote and then they interact with their consciousness. And so you're integrating this stuff and connecting, because there isn't really anything, we're not really separate. It's just that we're not putting our attention to connect them as much. So how do you do that from a perspective? So this is kind of a fun picture too. So, okay. And also remember, they talk about vortices, right? The law of attraction, vortexes. Well, you get this in the hyperdimensional math too, because if you have a real cluster, just like you do physics, you have a lot of mass together. It forms a sun and a planet, right? You have mass clustering to form these structures. Well, you can have a whole bunch of thoughts that are repeated over and over again, and forms this little vortex, and that's the vortexes from law of attraction. And so you can have, this one here might be your positive emotional state, and this one here might be your angry emotional state, right? Somebody's angry emotional state. And so here it shows that they're not integrated. So what do you want to do? You want to have a perspective bigger than this that integrates both of these, so you get the wholeness of all your states. And so you're not schizophrenic in your emotional states and have them separated. So there seems like, it looks like there's a separation in these states, and there are, because meaning of emotion is a big part of the clustering algorithm from here. That's what we learned from the math. Okay, and this shows up in the math that we've done, these clusters like this. Think of them as little bullseye, where you repeatedly doing the same thing over and over again, it forms this little bullseye with all the clustering around it. Okay, and so just realize that when you have emotion is a big part of this clustering. So don't form these little subclusters based on emotion. Try to be in the same state all the time, like love or compassion or joy. And that state, you're going to encode all your memories, so that all of this now is one big cluster with all of that encoded in that. Okay? So does that make sense, what I'm trying to make a point here?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because as I look at it, it reminds me of all the different matrix fields.
Yeah.
And as I'm seeing, everything
Yep.
is comprised of the matrices. And so
Yeah.
we have our own, little matrix, if you will, within our holographic field. But since we are a reflection of, we're the microcosm of the macrocosm, that totally makes sense to me, because, again, that's kind of the way when I'm looking at
Yeah.
people, working with them, this is the structure that I see.
Yeah. And a lot of psychics see this and they go, we could just change this little thought, this whole
Right.
structure would collapse.
Yeah, let's just move
Yeah.
this over a
Just move
little.
this over a little bit. They can't do it without permission, right? So, okay, so we talked about complexity a little bit here, and I just want to give a concrete example of what I mean by complexity. So if you had 7 qubits, A, B, C, D, and E, this is in the math on my system. So what we're going to do is we're going to couple 3 qubits together, and then 2 more, make 5, and then we're going to couple 7 of these. This is equivalent in math of creating a quantum register that has 7 qubits. Okay, so if you look at what are all the states of just 3, it looks like this. Okay, it's 8 states. But if you have 5, it has all of these states, and these states are not just one or the other, it's all of these simultaneously. So, and if you have all 7 of them, it looks like this, because the number of states grows exponentially as you combine more and more of these. Okay, so this is an exponential growth of state space. This is why quantum computing, like using a thing called Shor's algorithm can solve a problem that no classical algorithm can solve. It's because it's using the exponential power of these states and its mathematical properties to solve a problem that can't be done on a classical computer. Shor became famous because of this in 1994. And he kicked off the quantum computing revolution because everybody wanted to understand, what does it mean to have quantum algorithms? And now quantum computing is a $20 billion a year industry around the world because of this property. This is the exponential growth of quantum states, okay? And so give a sense for how big this is, just to give you how big, if you had 300 qubits, it would be 2 to the 300 states. That's how many of these states would be created. And 2 to the 300 states is more than the number of primitive particles in the known physical universe. So this grows very quickly for only with 300 of these. I just did 7 here, right? So you can't simulate these states in a classical universe because they're mathematical. So these states are exponential and they're concurrent. They're maximally concurrent on all the time. These are all happening at the same time because they're not inside space-time. So, well, what does that mean for us as a interested in consciousness and all this? It looks like this, is that you start out with this structure, and as you build more complexity, what you're going to do is you're going to build more entanglement, more coupling, you're growing in complexity, you're building more and more of these states. What you start out as a small state, and then as you build your complexity, you're not building higher frequency, you're building higher complexity. You end up building more of this, and finally you build even more of this. This is the growth of computational growth of quantum computing due to the complexity of consciousness and unconsciousness and consciousness and mind. Quantum mind, this is the quantum mind that you have when you can connect to your all your past lives, your life regression, is because you're connected to this biggest state that you are. Okay, this is all about complexity, not frequency, and this doesn't fit inside three-dimensional space. Okay, and this is 1,000,000 dimensions or 1,000,000,000 dimensions, and it has all this structure to it. This is the complexity part of it, and it's related to that previous slide where it shows quantum complexity increases exponentially. Okay, and this is all mathematical. So we're going to add one more feature to this. Not only to increase complexity, but you realize I'm trying to show you sort of the structure view here, using the bits and how they form little structures. But this is really, that previous slide shows you that it's more, all these states are simultaneously, right? So it's this dual side. And this is the next one here. Let me see, where is that one? Thought I had it here. Maybe I'll just skip ahead. Yeah, this one here. If you think your mind looks like this, where your brain is your mind, it's kind of wrong. Even if you think it's more like this, where you can escape your brain, that's also kind of wrong. It's more like this. These quantum states form this wave-like property, where the bits form this wave-like property that's non-local. And eventually what you're doing is you're connecting the state on the right to the brain on the left. And so this is the quantum mind is really wave-like. And it's this huge complexity that gives you this wave-like property. And so it's the balance between these structures, these rotes, and the quantum superposition of all these states that are wave-like, that have the superposition properties. And it's just like regular large language models that they use in AI. If you train it to recognize cats, you can't find a cat anywhere in the training data because it's distributed throughout all the data. This is a distributed view of the bits, of the qubits that we have. So realize that what we're trying to get to here is this quantum computing and states have this structure, but they also have this wave-like property. And that's where the quantum field theory comes from. We have the Gleason complexity, but the Gleason complexity is structure and states, and these states are wave-like. Okay, so
yeah.
So did you have a question? Do you have a comment or suggestion about that?
No, I don't, but I want to see if anyone has a comment, if they want to put it in the chat, I'll be sure to share that with you.
Yeah. So
yeah, so we have about 7 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions or comments, please just feel free to share those in the chat.
And we'll have some time in the questions at the end. So so I have a few more slides here. So the other thing is, once you have the structure, this is no time either. So there's a whole talk I can have about time. We talked about some of it, panoramic time, timeline therapy, life review, soul survival approach. And so we can talk a lot more about time, but and also this, and you're meeting these spiritual beings. So where is the spiritual beings coming from? Well, you have your quantum mind, your quantum cloud, hyperbit cloud, and they have theirs, and they're interacting with you, and they're interacting with you from a telepathy perspective. Okay, so we're all independent of our physical brains, and this is sort of a pictorial view of how that happens. It's similar to that slide in the beginning where it showed source, except here's they're interacting with you while you're, whether you're a walk-in interacting with your spirit guides, or whether you're not a walk-in, just a regular person interacting with your spirit guides, or a near-death experience interacting with your spirit guides in your near-death experience. This is what it would appear, it would feel like this to you. So, and you would present yourself as your own body too. I'm representing it as this cloud to remind you that that's what you really are. So, but the other thing is group. I mean, if you have a comment about that, but I wanted to get onto the group consciousness part of it too.
Okay.
So, the most, probably the famous group consciousness most people know about is Abraham, from Esther Hicks and Abraham, right? And Abraham talks about themselves as a group consciousness, right? And they also talk about themselves as infinite. They talk about themselves as they, and they talk about themselves as infinite intelligence, right? So how do you have any of those things, group consciousness? And so I'm trying to represent 7 group consciousness here, interacting in a way that they would interact with you. And most spirit guides are like this. They are interacting with you. They interact with you without mixing because they're wave-like. And so they're giving you these insights and helping you, right? And so anybody who has a walk-in, I know there's one guy who's a soul-infused walk-in where he has 22 of these interacting with him all the time. And it's like they're not like separate entities. They contribute knowing to him when he needs it, right? So so realize that if you have this superposition model of states that is outside space and time, and it's wave-like, you can have this wave-like property where they're all interacting in a group session because they're not isolated from each other. We're all connected in this domain. So we just have to be aware that we're connected, and we can connect to each other at will when we want to. So this is kind of a pictorial view of what a group consciousness would be. And a lot of walk-ins are living the experience of group consciousness all the time. And we're going to talk a little bit more about group consciousness when we talk about our wish unit here in a minute too. So any comments about that? Or I know we only have a couple minutes left here. So we already did this slide. So I'm going to talk just a couple more slides here now. This is what we call our wish unit. Yeah, exciting little device. It's about the size of a control for a TV, and has a little blue light. You turn it on. But when you turn it on, it starts generating these bubbles of order. Think of these as little orbs. You can also think of them as little snowflakes, hyperdimensional snowflakes. And this order is a quantum resonance. So it's not electromagnetic, and it creates order. And so what this is this is the order your mind craves, because it's the coherence that we have when we're having a near-death experience. So like applications for this is, so if you let it on for a long time, it then fills the whole room with this. And so it can fill a whole house, like 2,200 square feet of office, 2,000 square foot. And it takes the incoherent things from the bottom and filters it up and upscales it to produce this coherent space. So that's the name of the company, coherentspaces.life. And we have been in existence for a couple of years now, and we sell it to people for their personal use, for their therapeutic use in their offices. And I've had running in my house 2 of these. We have behind me here, two units here running the whole time. And we have a heart unit and a mind unit. And you can apply it for all kinds of therapy, for personal use, even business uses. One lady used it for her son, and then she realized that all of the meetings that she had on Zoom all of a sudden were half as long as they were before because people started cooperating. And so from a business perspective, it makes sense to upscale the coherence of your meetings and all the people in your meetings. So like that. So, okay. So if you have more questions, I have a bunch of other videos about this out there, and coherentspaces.life has testimonials out there. We talk about those. So this is the summary slide here. Here's some technical talk about what I'm doing, but this is survival of non-brain mind. Walk-ins are supported with that. Here's a sort of another view of the coherent spaces using snowflake model. hyperdimensional snowflakes. And ultimately, this is what we are. We're a group consciousness. And by the way, this thing here is a group consciousness. This is connecting you to a group consciousness because it's connecting you to a higher state, 4 or 5 or 6 dimensional state that you can't get in 3 dimensions. Okay, so this is a group consciousness technology also. So so this to me is a group consciousness here. Essentially, remember your brain is interacting with your state of your mind, which is bits, but it's the state that's all wave-like. And so how do you manage this wave-like state, which is your consciousness, with all the wave-like states that you can interact with for all the other spirit guides and stuff like that, including your walk-in and spirit guides and stuff like that. So this is the last slide. So just in time.
Love it. Love it. Wonderful. Okay.
You like these slides?
I definitely like the slides. If you want to go ahead and end the slides, we'll bring you back
stop
up.
sharing.
There you go. Wonderful. Okay. I don't see any questions. Does anyone want to ask something as opposed to writing it? Do you want to bring your hands up? Susie? Unable? Okay, just a moment, please.
Trying to unmute her. Huh?
Yep, there. You're unmuted. You should be able to unmute. Okay, well, sorry about that. It's participants are able to unmute themselves in the commands, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But okay, does anyone else have a question or a comment? I think everybody's mind is blown. I think everybody needs a little time to probably process what's going on. Okay. Okay. Hi, Cindy. Can you unmute?
There I am. Okay. I don't have a question. I just want to say great presentation. So cool. Absolutely loved it.
Okay. Thank you. Hey.
My voice goes up when I get excited.
Thank you so much. All right. Susie, I sent you the ask to, there you go.
Yay, it worked this time. It kept saying, you wouldn't let me in. I said, yes, she is. But yeah, this was just so awesome. I just spent a lot of time with the physicist and consciousness, and this is fascinating. Where do we get that thing do you sell those? Is that where we go to get that? Tell us where to do. Oh, you're muted now too. He wrote that. He said he can't unmute himself.
Okay, unmute. There, now I did.
There
Thank you. You gave me the power.
Yay.
Yeah, you can go to coherentspaces.life and there that .life instead of .com, life. And it was in that one slide. And if you go to quantumdoug.com, there's all my talks and there's a link to coherentspaces.life. And if you're a therapist, we can give you a discount being a therapist. And so talk to me about that. Send me an email about that. And
can we put it in the chat so we can type it up?
Yeah. So.
And if you would also like to speak it out loud for our people who may be listening to us on the audio podcast.
Yeah. It's also in my talk. I gave slide. There's links there, and then also www. All these were in my slideshow. So if you lose it, just go look into the quantumdoug.com has the links to everything. It's sort of my personal history of all the talks I've given and all the links to my book and the quantum and coherent spaces and coherentspaces.life, LIFE. is the place where you can buy these wish units. And like I said, if you're a therapist, come talk to me. We want therapists to have this. We have a lot of chiropractors using it, massage therapists, people like that. And they say that they're getting a 20-25% improvement in their acceptance by their clients because they have this on. It's creating more coherence in their whole office. People change just by walking into their office now, just because their device, the space is like sacred now. So, because this device is on all the time. So we want to get the word out.
Yeah. So it's creating like a 0-point gravity field, correct?
Well, it's not energy based, it's coherence based. So, and it turns out in order for it to be coherent from a quantum computing perspective, it has to be 4 and 5 dimensional. And so it's not of this physical world. It's more like a group consciousness connection, and you get more insight, you're calmer, negative emotions drop out, because they don't participate. Negative emotions are more like chaos. This is the opposite of chaos. So negative emotions drop out. So your emotional state for your whole household changes as a result of having this. If you have it in your office and somebody's a real troublemaker, they leave because they can't stand to be with this coherent space energy all the time. So just it happens. You're not forcing them, but they decide, need to go somewhere else.
Great. Well, Doug, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I really enjoyed your presentation. We'll have to get you to come back again next year and share a little bit more. We'll drop straight into group consciousness. I think that's be a wonderful place. So again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who's here. Thank you for everyone watching, whether you're at home kicked back or whether you're sitting watching on your computer. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you. If you are watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and share button. So everyone, until we're back together again, namaste, much love, and I will look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much.